Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the frequency with which anti-white slogans and anti-whiteism, fascist, Nazi, colonialist, white supremacist, the frequency with which these words and phrases appear in the media, and in parallel, various government programs to justify, defend, or implement something like mass migration, or justify abortion, or whatever the case may be. So, these things. For example, since the shooting on Bondi Beach here in Sydney, Australia, the leftist controlled, globalist leftist controlled media, which is by far and away the biggest sector here, they've gone on a fanatical crusade telling us we're surrounded by Nazis. Secretly, Nazis are plotting everywhere. Nazis, white supremacists, Nazis, and they just won't fucking shut up about it. Are there any Nazis? Well, no, it's purely invented. And if there were any, then they're exaggerating it by 100-fold. So, but that's their determined. So the word, the Nazi, just off the charts in terms of the amount of times it's mentioned. And of course, this is to run defence and protection of mass migration, of which many of the people coming into Australia in the mass migration wave are Islamic. So it's just to run protection for that. It's not news or information. It's just pure interdiction type propaganda. Nonetheless, if we look at the amount of times these words appear in the media, and there are various groups now that will collate those sort of add up and aggregate all those things, that then in this month, the word Nazi appeared 100 times, but suddenly in the following month it appears 10,000 times, even though there are no Nazis to talk about. It's clearly all part of a propaganda, narrative construction, messaging campaign. And part of that is, of course, to do with abortion. I mean, just to sort of focus your minds on this, just since 1970 as an example, or probably mid-70s, I think would be maybe more. Since the mid-70s in the Western world, there have been substantially more abortions than all the deaths in all the wars, all World War I, World War II, and all that sort of thing. So the number of deaths is in the multiple tens of millions, and we regard all the deaths of the war as being remembrance and Poppy Day and shrines and everything. Whereas, again, many more millions of abortions have taken place, and that's celebrated as something of choice, stunning and brave, and so on and so forth. So clearly, we've got our moral compass has just disappeared into the abyss. If that's how these things, the tens of millions of abortions are considered stunning and brave, while tens of millions of deaths in war considered as bad, aren't both bad. Now, I don't have any fixed views on abortion, by the way, so I'm not for or against. And I take pretty much a middle course, so I don't really have a horse in this race. But I was taking, this is years ago now, I was taking my young son to the hospital, and the room where we were waiting for the specialist, the room adjacent, it was girls who were there for what do they call it? If you get an abortion early stage, a curette or something, I think it's anyway. And I looked in there, and you couldn't miss it. You just looked to the side, and there they were. There's quite a few of them, and they were all young. They were all schoolgirls. I would think third year high school, maybe something like that. Some were white, mostly non-white, but some were white. And there was one, I remember, a stunningly attractive young girl. I'm not surprised she was getting male attention. But they were there for abortion. Now, do you want 14-year-old girls having babies, procreating? Do you want that? Does any society really want that? What problems does it create? Now, if you look at some of the islander communities, black communities, African communities, particularly the third world type communities, procreation at 13 is not unusual. I wouldn't call it widespread, but it's not unusual. And you see this in black communities. So in the United States, how many 11 and 12 and 13-year-old black girls are getting abortions? Is that a bad thing? In the overall scheme of things, is it a good thing? Well, it snuffs out a human life, thus bad morally. It prevents a child coming to the world in the most miserable and wretched circumstances. Should that be viewed as a good thing? Should it be that any 11-year-old girl who wants to procreate can? And so on. I mean, it just goes on and on. How many positions can you take on this in terms of moral perspective? Is it blanket all bad? Is it blanket all good? Now, in situations where people are having abortions, it's purely a lifestyle choice. A woman somehow, she doesn't know how, she doesn't want to take the pill because of any sort of medication to prevent pregnancy. She doesn't want to do that, so she relies on the man, wearing a condom or something like that. So sometimes it can be an accident. Sometimes the woman's trying to entrap the man. This used to happen a lot in the 1960s. A woman attempting to entrap a man was a widespread thing. I'll let you fuck me, but then if I get pregnant, you have to marry me. And it was and the man was never party to that. It was the woman's unilateral decision to play that thing, and that's where a lot of the adoptions and things like that. So rather than abort, they would typically, not that abortions didn't happen, but in those days they would typically try and adopt the child out to a family that wanted them and had the resources. That was very important. You had to have the resources to look after the child. And then it changed to, well, why don't we just steal his money and give it to her and she can look at that. So it changed there. But this whole idea of abortion was effectively a lifestyle choice that a woman in her 20s, maybe she's got a job, maybe she doesn't want to, have children, maybe it's a good job. But when you look at how many well-paying and fulfilling jobs there are out there, there's very few. And so how many women have got this wonderful, fantastic career and job and who say, well, I don't want children because I've got this high-powered kick-ass, pays me. Not many women are in that category. I don't know. Would there be... if you look at, say, the jobs in Australia that pay the sort of money so you can live in a nice area, drive a decent car, and when, you're not shopping at Walmart for your clothes, that type of thing, there's maybe only 5%, 10% at the most of jobs that are there. Half of those are, say, approximately half are filled by women. So there's not a lot of women that have these fulfilling careers or well-paid jobs, not many. So that's not the issue. So we're looking at women that are working as dead-end bullshit, boring as fuck jobs as checkout operators in the grocery store. Now, they say, oh, I've got such a great career. Here in the grocery store, some low-paid bullshit retail job. So I don't want children because no, it's not that. There's more to that. Women have been programmed and conditioned that marrying and procreation is a form of enslavement in effect. And this goes back to the 1960s, even earlier than that in the United States. You look at Shulamith Firestein, who says childbearing is, in her words, and she's very Marxist, is the tapeworm of exploitation of women, she means. So women have been through school and all sorts of programming, movies, the media, and so just to, the kick-ass chicks, the cool chicks don't have children. I mean, gee. And because of the devaluation of the marriage contract, then marriage is seen as just a temporary, again, a lifestyle choice. And just as, if not more importantly, if not most as importantly, the amount of men who make enough money now to support a dependent wife and children have gone from 75% in 1970 to 5% today. So only 1 in 20 men makes enough to support a dependent wife and children, do things like buy a house and that sort of stuff. So there's a huge shortage viable, as in financially viable, marriage partners out there. Now, rather than sort of accept this reality, instead the propaganda machine is, well, abortion's good because if you don't agree with it, you're a Nazi, fascist, white supremacist, only men have got a problem, misogyny, and so you can plot it, and if you plot on a chart the number of abortions, and also plot on a chart the number of times in the media the word Nazi and white supremacist and misogynist, all that stuff appear. The chart, I mean, it can't be a coincidence. The correlation is close to perfect. And when they stop talking about abortion, or it's not, topic for discussion anymore, then suddenly it all drops away again, and the abortions might continue at a certain level, but the amount of times you see the word misogynist, Nazi in relation to abortion suddenly drops away. And so clearly there's a relation. Same with mass migration in relation to migration. As soon as they want to gin up the migration numbers, instantly it's like, bang, you just see it. Suddenly there's all this Nazi and white supremacist and fascist appears at the same time. So they're running interference for and in support of the globalist programs, and then anyone that disagrees is a fascist, Nazi, Hitler, and that's sort of how it is. And you can plot this on a chart and just see the as the numbers increase on mass migration, so to increase the reference to Nazis and fascists and white supremacists. So clearly we're being heavily manipulated by the media. Coming back to the abortion issue, however, whereas the numbers are staggering, I don't know how many of those, this is the numbers of abortions, I don't know how many of those are 11-year-old, 12-year-old black girls from the projects. Do you want them having children? Do you want them having babies and procreating? I don't think so, would be my position. If a woman, she's dating and she accidentally gets pregnant, then she goes, oh, wow, okay, well, I didn't plan for this. It wasn't a choice that I sort of made. The guy I'm dating, no way does he want to have a relationship, or no way could he afford to support a family. So that's not going to work. He doesn't make enough money anywhere near it where I can quit my job and look after a child and just screw him for the child support. That's not going to work. So, what I'll do is just get an abortion. There's no real other way out of this. And I am sympathetic to that. Do I like it from a moral perspective? Well, no. But am I sympathetic to that as an actual reality? From a moral perspective, so all abortion is bad. Morally, that's it. And there is a case being made for that. But that can be made in a vacuum, in the abstract, away from all realities, such as, do you want an 11-year-old black girl from the projects procreating? I don't think any society would or should want that. Moral perspectives, aside. So the point I wanted to make here is that there's been more abortions than there were deaths in the 2 world wars, and that should get everyone sitting up and thinking, how is this even happening? How is this possible? The claim that, well, because the births per woman, this is in the West generally, have gone below replacement level, sometimes 1.1, 1.2. This seems insane. And even if all abortions were stopped, it wouldn't make up that difference. So until there's a really major rethink of not simply abortions, but making sure that a breadwinner makes enough money, as cost of living issues, makes enough money to support a dependent wife and children, as it was again, as just a young kid. I remember, I'm just a few years old, 5, 6, 7 years old. I remember people that worked in grocery stores. They worked in a factory, a taxi driver. These sort of people, they could all afford to buy a house. Not a fancy house on the waterfront or 10 bathrooms and 50 bedrooms, nothing like that. It's very basic, but they could afford it. And they could afford to support a dependent wife and children, have a basic, Ford or General Motors car, an entry-level car, and they could afford all that. on that sort of income. But again, 75% of people could afford it then. 5% of people, workers, can afford it today, given the very substantially altered structure of the cost of living. So we need a major rethink, and I'm hoping the Trump administration, because it's not an easy gig, this one, can come up and say, how can we change this landscape, not only in cost of living, but return validity to the marriage contract, get into the education system, and stop the endless denigration of boys as being Nazis and fascists and misogynists, endless casting of women as oppressed victims needing restitution for centuries of oppression. This is tearing our society apart, purposefully, I would argue, but it achieves nothing for a cohesive society that's able to just replicate itself. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.